Hey everyone, Liam from Solitude here, and in today's video I'm going to take you through how Brisbane saved Australian rock music in the early 2010s. So when we got to around the year 2010, rock music generally around the Western world was on its way down in the charts. And that was okay. Hip-hop was taking over, becoming more mainstream and the most popular type of music, along with pop obviously. And in Australia especially, this was happening too. The likes of Powderfinger, Eskimo Joe, The Living End, and other bands like that were no longer reaching the heights that they used to 10 years before with their single releases. They weren't really making splashes on the charts. This doesn't mean that rock music was getting worse or was bad. It was just becoming less popular and more difficult to find good rock music out there. For those people who were fans of rock music, if you went looking or you knew the places to find it, you could definitely find some good rock music out there in the turn of the decade. I mean, there were plenty of bands kind of bubbling away in the early 2010s around the years of 2011, 2012, like Your Children Collides and Tame Impala, a psychedelic rock band. And if it wasn't for them, there wasn't really any bands in Australia making movements towards mainstream success at all. By the time the year 2013 came around, alternative rock music was pretty much nowhere to be seen on the charts, and it was not getting played on commercial radio at all. If you tuned into Triple J, you would still hear it quite regularly, and of course in local suburban clubs and pubs, there was still plenty of alternative rock music being played, and there still is to this day. But the band and the song in particular that really shook things up for the alternative rock scene in Australia was Violent Soho and their song Covered in Chrome. This song took so many people by surprise for a couple of reasons. Plenty of people in Australia were aware of the band Violent Soho in the late 2000s and early 2010s, but their debut album was seen to be as a bit of a failure, and they released a couple of other singles which did okay, but didn't really set the world on fire. When they released Covered in Chrome, that changed everything. The song was so unique and powerful and so catchy and memorable because of the pre-chorus drop that it really just turned everything on its head. All of a sudden, everyone wanted to be in a grunge rock band playing heavy music with distorted guitars again, and there was a little bit more of a departure away from the kind of indie bubblegum sort of stuff that was getting big with the likes of San Cisco, and more attention being placed in the underground on this kind of new garagey, grungy rock that Violent Soho were doing. And of course, when their album came out, Hungry Ghost, their second one, it was so popular, and on Triple J, it just got a lot of airtime and cemented them as being pretty much the favorite alternative rock band in the Australian alternative scene. Of course, when this Brisbane band broke through, it meant that they would pave the way for others to follow their footsteps. And they had their friends that they'd been touring and playing shows with in the local Brisbane scene for many years, who also made their way through. Firstly, I'd say Deathrays, who'd already had a bit of underground success themselves and had also won an ARIA for their debut album, but it really didn't get that much attention and was kind of a niche win. Covered in Chrome's success helped them get more attention, and it saw them get more airtime on Triple J and voted into a Hottest 100 like Violent Soho were themselves. The next band that got big, of course, was Dune, who followed Violent Soho and Deathrays in the underground punk garagey scene in Brisbane, and were suddenly getting a lot more attention as they were a band you would often find on lineups with those two. Everything kind of came to a head in the year 2016 when Violent Soho brought out Waco, which was one of the most highly anticipated rock albums of that year, and it was followed by a huge tour announcement with these three bands playing together, as well as Gooch Palms from Newcastle. In recent memory, this was one of the most highly anticipated shows to go across Australia that was basically a tour of an album. This wasn't a festival, but it almost kind of felt like a mini one. It was just like a huge celebration of the Brisbane rock scene and all the success that these three bands had had as they brought their music together to play a huge Violent Soho headline show for their tour of Waco. I personally went to this show that they did in Perth, and it was one of the most hectic and fun experiences that I've had at a live show. Something that was really fun about it was every support act was so hyped and everyone was into it straight from the get-go. Normally when you go to a show, the headline act is, very much the one that everyone gets into, and the first one or two bands that play before get people a little bit excited, but no one usually moves around a whole lot. But as soon as Dune Rats came out, people were going crazy. Deathrays went to another level, and then the moment Violent Soho came out, I just remember the crowd turning into this wave of people where you couldn't move, and it was just a weird but incredible experience at the same time. All in all, these three bands and the Brisbane rock scene in general, in my opinion, kind of revitalised the alternative rock scene in Australia, and I feel like when we look back now, you can kind of see the influence that these three bands and their sound has had on where rock music is at right now. We have a lot of popularity in this kind of like surf rock, garage rock sound, and I think Dune Rats were probably one of the big early influences with that. I also think that Violent Soho's kind of grungy aesthetic was really picked up on by a lot of people, but they found it a lot easier to play the kind of garagey stuff that Dune Rats were doing, and they kind of merged those two sort of sounds together. Deathrays also, you could say, were doing a kind of surfy thing at times, but were a little bit more experimental and were probably a little bit more for the kind of music nerd types. Another Brisbane band that had a lot of underground success, and I personally really enjoyed their music a lot too, was Wax. They played some shows with Violent Soho too, and of course they, had a lot of influence in the local scene, and to this day I think we can hear a little bit of Wax influence in the local scenes around Australia. I really wanted to just show my appreciation to this early 2010s Brisbane rock scene, because to me it was one of the best scenes in the last 15 or so years to pop up, and really cool how it all sort of happened in one little part of Australia. Obviously there were other bands around Australia doing cool rock music as well, but it really was these three that held the fort down and pushed alternative rock music forward, despite the fact that there was no mainstream attention on it at all, and it made it such a hyped underground scene. Thanks for checking out this video. If you like this, please like and subscribe. I'm thinking of putting out a few more, a little bit about sort of niche areas and genre specific stuff that came out of those places, so keep an eye out for those if you're interested in more.